Yeah, I guess the thing you hit on at the end, and my son and I have talked about this, is the extent to which, and then we began doing some Google searches and whatnot, and you might expand on this, is the amount of troops and bases we have all over the country in terms of just everywhere. And you take the example, I mean, given how Europe has, at least over the last 8 years, has certainly been sticking it in our eye every chance they get. It just strikes me as, hey, look, you guys are modern countries. You know, you need to provide for your own defense. We don't need to be over here. Sure, if something happens, we'll come to help you. But for us to permanently station people, it's just ridiculous.
When it's getting to be a long time too. I mean, they've been in Germany since the war.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're now 60 years in Germany, 60 years in Japan, 50 years in Korea.
Yeah.
And but some of it, we have to decide how we react and how we want to have our foreign policy portrayed. When my dad stood up to Giuliani and said that our foreign policy causes some of what we got on 9/11, he didn't say that it justifies what those people did to us, but we have to understand that there is blowback from our foreign policy. For example, we have to ask ourselves, who needs to be part of NATO? What does NATO need to be at this point? One of the big things the neocons, the people in the Republican Party sort of on the other side from where I come from, is they want Georgia to be part of NATO. Well, Georgia sits right on the border of Russia. Do you think that might be provocative to put them in NATO? NATO's treaty actually says that if they're attacked, we will defend them. So if the treaty means something, that means all of a sudden we're at war with Russia. If Georgia would have become, Bush wanted Georgia to become part of NATO. Had they been part of NATO, we'd be at war with Russia right now. That's kind of a scary thing. We have to decide whether putting missiles in Poland is going to provoke the Russians. Maybe not to war, but whether it's worth provoking them or whether we have the money to do it. Bottom line is we have the money, but we have 750 military bases, a lot of them in fairly stable parts of the world. But then we have to decide, like North Korea, where typically Republicans are all, even Obama's really bellicose against North Korea. North Korea can't feed their people. Every couple of years they go into a virtual starvation. They build a few missiles, this missile fell in the ocean. They have no way to feed their people, much less attack anyone. Does that mean we don't need to have defenses? No, we should have defenses against them. But we also don't need to, I mean, Newt Gingrich proposed bombing the missile site before they did a test, a test of their missile that wasn't even successful. I think every one of their missiles they've sent off in the last 3 years have been unsuccessful. And they have been virtually starving. But you know what we usually do? We play this cat and mouse with them, we go to them, we offer them money. We'll say, all right, if you'll quit work on your nuclear reactor, which isn't working anyway, but if you'll quit working on it, we'll give you enough food to last 6 months. You know, and we've done that repeatedly. But we do have to address it, and it is something that a lot of Republicans don't agree on. I mean, there may be many here, and I don't mind hearing it if you disagree. I just think we have to address it if we are fiscal conservatives. If we don't care about the budget, there are Republicans who say deficits don't matter. Jack Kemp was sort of a deficits don't matter kind of Republican, and there have been others. But you have to decide if they do matter. See, I think they ultimately matter, and I don't think they're an academic question, because I think the deficit is so large now, it's at the highest percentage of GNP I think that it's ever been, higher than World War II now. The way we pay for the deficit is one of 3 ways. But we don't pay for taxes because then it wouldn't be a deficit. If we pay for taxes in a balanced budget, that's not a deficit. So we pay for it through either borrowing or monetizing the debt. We borrowed a lot from the Chinese. We borrowed a lot from many different countries. They're sort of at wit's end where they don't want to borrow capital anymore. But then we're also going to have to monetize it, which means the Federal Reserve simply prints up the money and through a computer entry buys treasury bills and they bought our debt. The problem is that if you print up too much money, the money existing becomes worth less. And the money supply, the M1 has increased 239% in the last 4 months. So there are some people, and these aren't all just doomsday people, there are some people who fear for the monetary system that you might get out into the working world and be like a Weimar Republic, and you've got your paycheck in a wheelbarrow and it buys a loaf of bread.
Nathan,
Good.
I'd like to know, what do you think about the fair tax idea?
The fair tax is an idea of going to a national sales tax instead of an income tax. I would always favor a sales tax over an income tax. But here, I'll tell you what I think the problem is that it will never pass, because the general consensus says that it will be a regressive tax, meaning that poor people will pay a greater share than they do now, rich people or people of middle to upper income will pay less. But I do like the sales tax better than an income tax. For example, if I were governor of Kentucky, I'd make the sales tax, what do we pay, 6? I'd make it 8 and get rid of the income tax. So I do like that concept. It's hard to go to that, but yeah, I'd be in favor of anything that gets rid of the income tax. The other danger, though, is that when they do it, they're going to try to transition to something they call revenue neutral. And always be afraid of your government when they tell you something's revenue neutral, because it's probably a lie, or probably the numbers will work out in the end where it wasn't really revenue neutral. Because you may get rid of the income tax, but it may be a 35% sales tax. And what does that do to abruptly shift to something like that? I don't know. What does anybody else? What do you think of the fair tax, Dr. Wilk?
Well, to me, I think what eventually happens, to the extent that we even get any foothold there, is that they're likely to still come back with the income tax. I mean, it's just, taxes just don't go away, is the problem. And therefore, it's nice to talk about phasing it out. There will always be reasons to not do it.
It's another reason why I don't get excited. Like, for example, Ernie Fletcher gets elected. We have a Republican for the first time in 40 years. What does he do? Revenue neutral tax reform. Well, if I wouldn't even join, I wouldn't even come out here tonight if I was going to be proposing revenue neutral. Who cares? Revenue neutral means shifting the burden from one person to the other. It's like, you know, do I care? Why don't we stick it to the cigarette smokers, or the people who eat Big Macs, or the people who drink wine? You know, it's like one person versus the other. It still comes out of the economy. My goal is that government should be smaller, taxes should be lower, government should be less involved in your personal lives, your economic lives. Everything about government should be less. And so I can't get motivated to run for office, give a speech, do anything for revenue neutral. And that's kind of what fair is too, because they're talking about making, we do this grand change and be revenue neutral. Still would be better than the income tax, but I just can't get as excited about it.
Do you think there's any role for the U.S. in the United Nations?
I think there is a role for some kind of world discussion body, and that would be the UN. Things I don't like about the UN are we pay more than our fair share, I think, of the expenses of it. And I don't like the fact of having U.S. troops fight under a UN banner. I think we should always fight under the U.S. flag, and only for reasons that we think are important to our country, not, you know, the UN's got a lot of petty tyrants and socialists and graft and thieves and you name it. I mean,
they're all in the Security Council.
Yeah, well, you have there are all these third world countries, and we should never submit our policy to them. The UN also will pass stuff like that they think banning guns is a good idea. Or they'll pass stuff saying like, you know, that our taxes are too low and we need to have some internet, worldwide internet tax. So I always come up with crazy notions I don't agree with. But at the same time, do I believe we should have a body to discuss things, and that negotiation is a good way to avoid war? Yeah, I think negotiation and trade are good ways to avoid war. So